Aloha once again, friends and family. Let us continue on where we are at in chapter 3. Another important factor to consider here, and one that has been written about in many of your books, is the quarantine that went into effect after the destruction of Lemuria. Because the vibratory level of humans had dropped significantly since the early days of colonization, Earth was no longer considered a safe place and desirable place upon which to settle peaceful, loving groups. To prevent the Orions and Dracos from corrupting the astral and etheric civilizations on neighboring worlds, a force field was put into place by the seventh density Pleiadians to keep Earth's business confined to Earth. This veil was not lifted until approximately 1987, during the time known as harmonic convergence. Despite the quarantine, the problems on Earth continued. Once Earth's instability settled down after the destruction of Lemuria, the Draco once again landed and attempted to proliferate, but had a hard time in their reptilian bodies. They then restored to incarnating through the surviving Lemurians on a relatively stable landmass in what is now the Atlantic Ocean. At the same time, groups of Pleiadians saw the opportunity to once again settle the Earth, and they came as well, despite the quarantine. The councils of Regal and Betelgeuse from Orion also returned, and they found the atmosphere of Earth still ideal for rapid proliferation. They were also able to get through the quarantine. The DNA of the survivors was now primarily Orion, with some Sirian, Andromedan, and Draconian energy as well. The Pleiadian DNA content was still only about 20%. As the new civilizations began to emerge, the Pleiadian, Orion, and Draconian DNA began to mutate, and the energy of the incarnated souls on Earth became more scientific and intellectual in nature. These humans still had the reptilian brain, but their cerebral cortex also contained elements of higher Pleiadian virtues and understanding. Thus began the first period of Atlantis, the rise and fall of Atlantis. The civilization that began to develop shortly after 100,000 BC was very much like the one that exists today, with all manner of technological achievements. The higher Pleiadian mind, combined with the passion of the Orions and the competition of the Dracos, resulted in a structured world of mechanics and great architecture. Michael and his legions, having been humbled by their mistakes of past times, once again tried to influence the more evolved souls of Atlantis. The councils of Regal, Dark Orions, having backed off during Earth's instability, once again took an interest in what was happening. In addition to the large numbers of their people incarnating into human form, they maintained a presence in spacecraft above the Atlantean continent. Obviously, the quarantine had not worked, and once again Earth was a magnet for all sorts of savory and unsavory characters. The first period of Atlantis came to a partial halt during the end of the precessional cycle in approximately 50,000 BC. However, the civilization was rebuilt and the final period of Atlantis began. There is a lot of fairly accurate information about this period in several of your writings, including the works of Alice Bailey and Edgar Cayce. We will not duplicate that effort. We will say, however, that the downfall of the second Atlantis occurred in about 23,200 BC. and was due to the misuse of crystalline energy generation systems, not the most recent precessional shift that occurred about 700 years prior, which was a relatively minor one. We will give a brief accounting of how the destruction of Atlantis transpired. About 2,000 years before the end of Atlantis, the Atlanteans developed radionics devices using quartz crystals. They were able to generate all the energy they needed for virtually every part of their civilization. This energy was powerful enough to tempt the lust for power within the unsavory aspects of the society. Several Atlantean scientists made deals with Orion groups orbiting the Earth, trading Atlantean technology for Orion propulsion systems. These ego-based scientists attempted to gain superiority over their colleagues. They also tried to obtain sophisticated military equipment in the hopes they could start a rebel faction opposed to the councils of Atlantis. Very soon they had Orion factions working with them on the surface of the Earth. The Orion-influenced insurgents wanted greater and greater power from the energy-generating crystals, and they began engineering them to be used as weapons. They never got the chance to wage war because one of the particularly strong crystal generators exploded, sinking the continent and most of her inhabitants. Only a tiny handful escaped in airships, and an even smaller number in seagoing vessels. Over 90% of those that tried to escape by sea were drowned in massive tsunamis. Those that fled the airships relocated to what is now Central and South America as well as Egypt. This channel has discovered that nearly all the people he works with in healing sessions have past life memories of being involved in the downfall of Atlantis. Note, up until recently, several of the crystal generators that were submerged underneath the Atlantic Ocean were still transmitting beams of energy up through the water to the surface, causing time and space distortions. This area is known as the Bermuda Triangle. We, the founders, remained largely in observation mode as usual during the period of Atlantis. It was our perception that what really destroyed the continent was an imbalance between the head and the heart, the mental and emotional bodies of Earth souls. The scientifically oriented hybrid souls of the Atlantean period had suppressed their emotions in a manner similar to the Luciferians, and in so doing, most Atlanteans lost their ability to discern between energies that were supportive of spiritual growth and those that merely led to the accumulation of physical, astral, and etheric power. Had the inhabitants of Atlantis been balanced in their emotional and mental bodies, they would have seen what was happening and been able to take steps to prevent it. We see a similar scenario being played out in your modern world today. You are very close to where you were at the time of the destruction of Atlantis. However, there are two important differences. The current divine dispensation is encouraging a large number of souls to awaken to higher states of consciousness, and there are many benevolent ET groups that are closely monitoring the state of affairs on your world and will act in an instant to prevent large-scale nuclear war. In addition, these groups have sophisticated technologies that can detect exotic and unusual weapons before they are tested. extensively. The post-Atlantean period. There were several cultures that flourished briefly after the destruction of Atlantis, including the Egyptian, Sumerian, Biblical, several cultures described in the Old and New Testaments of the Christian Bible, and the various Greek periods. During those times, another important player in the cosmic drama arrived on the scene, and that was the Syrians. We are going to examine the role of the Syrians in the Jewish and Christian faiths and in Greek mythology. In addition, we will offer our perspective on what really happened during the time of Jesus, who he was, what he actually did, and where the distortions lie in the official historical accounting. In a future book, we will take a look at the Aztec, Toltec, and Mayan cultures. They were also part of the post-Atlantis story. We also promise to elaborate on civilizations that existed in other parts of the planet before, during, and after Atlantis, including the Australian Aborigines and South and North American Indians. All this will need to wait until a later date. One post-Atlantean culture worth exploring at this time is that of the Egyptians, since elements of this story adequately set the framework for our upcoming discussion of the earth changes, the rise and fall of Egypt. The so-called battle between light and dark forces continued after the destruction of Atlantis. Your world seemed to seesaw between periods of brief enlightenment, followed by times of corruption and relative darkness. Egypt was a case in point. A group of seventh density Pleiadians determined to restore the blueprint of humanity long lost to Orion, Draco, and Sirian, Andromedan, and other renegade groups, took advantage of the fact that the few survivors of Atlantis were relatively pure in heart and mind. Those that landed along the Nile River were the first to be visited by the Pleiadian welcoming committee. This contingent was headed by a teacher later named Thoth, who, contrary to ancient writings, did not have the head of a bird or reptile. The humanoid depicted as such was a Draco-Pleiadian Andromedan hybrid, who came along much later and corrupted the teachings of Thoth. Thoth was a radiant being of blue-white light, a humanoid with similar color and energy to the way you might view us in the higher realms. He was able to step his vibration down far enough to communicate directly with the descendants of Atlantis and to teach them in the ways of truth, cooperation, harmony, and higher mathematics. As many of your channeled writings will confirm, Thoth was the engineer behind the Great Pyramid. This device served several purposes, but its primary functions was as an ascension chamber and controller of Earth's grid system. As correctly pointed out by your Egyptologists, the Great Pyramid was aligned with Mintaka, a star in Orion's belt. Mintaka became the central star in Orion's enlightened government following the resolution of the Regal-Betelgeuse Wars about 100,000 years ago. The alignment with Mintaka had geographical significance in that it indicated a central point in Earth's precession of the axis occurring approximately every 25,920 years. The grid system of Earth was correlated and mapped by the Pleiadians according to the precession, with the point at Giza being the center of the grid, the ley lines and vortexes coming off at various sacred geometric angles therefrom. The Martians, during their heyday, had a similar grid system constructed at the same latitude and longitude on their planet, also engineered by seventh density Pleiadians, but alas, it never achieved its potential as a portal for ascension due to interference from Orion and Draco factions. Another strategic purpose of the Great Pyramid was to serve as an incoming portal for groups of Pleiadians, so that the purity and vision of the original blueprint would have a fighting chance of getting reestablished on Earth. Thoth and his group had a fair degree of success in working with the Atlanteans in the temples of initiation for the purpose of accelerating soul evolution. There were many buildings constructed along the banks of the Nile. Of the several thousand Atlanteans who made this area their home, a significant percentage took part in the ascension activities and initiations in the Great Pyramid. The seventh density Pleiadians constructed the device in a matter of days using levitation and laser technology. A series of passageways were designed to accommodate those who needed extended periods inside the device in order to accelerate their ascension templates in preparation for moving into fifth density light bodies. Ascension is discussed at length in Chapter 6. The subterranean chambers beneath the Giza Plateau were already inhabited by those who had escaped underground during previous earthly conflagrations. The Pleiadians, in concert with these underground groups, established the Hall of Records several thousand feet below the Great Pyramid. It exists today in the higher etheric realms of the inner earth. The Sphinx was later erected by another group of Egyptians to mark the entrance to the portal. The Great Pyramid was completed in approximately 10,500 BC. It has only been in the last 20 years that scientists on your world have begun to correctly date the Great Pyramid. Until recently, it was assumed this device was linked to various other pyramids that were constructed using the labor of the Egyptian people to serve as tombs for the pharaohs. This channel goes into detail in Life on the Cutting Edge on the lame attempts by later Egyptians to reconstruct the ascension chambers after Egypt had fallen to the Syrians. We will have more on the fall of Egypt shortly. Accounts from adepts of the original mystery schools of Thoth can be found sporadically in various artifacts, including the Emerald Tablets, and in channeled messages from various clairvoyants. Essentially, they document the initiations given to prepare the fourth density souls for ascension into fifth density. Ancient Egypt thrived until about 7,500 BC, at which time a group of seventh density Sirians from the Sirius B star system arrived on the scene and began unraveling the work of Thoth and his group. The Jewish and Greek legends and myths are all about the Syrians. We will not detail the events that unfolded in Greece and Israel, but suffice to say they are similar to what is detailed below as far as the soul lessons are concerned. Although these Syrian factions had great technological and psychic power, They had not resolved their egoic issues satisfactorily, and as a result became infatuated with worship and praise by their underlings. In other words, they were on a guru trip, to quote a popular phrase. At first, it was subtle. They demonstrated their miraculous powers to those who did not have the spiritual understanding to see through the charade. As the Syrians intermingled and interbred, the DNA of the descendants became more and more polluted with the Syrians' brand of egoistic messiahship. The mystery schools began to develop into pecking orders and devotion to Syrian gods. The God of the Old Testament, Jehovah, was a seventh density Syrian. Those of you familiar with Jehovah's teachings but unwilling to accept the premise that Jehovah was an egotistical Syrian should examine the result of Jehovah's presence on earth. As stated many times by this channel, the Old Testament is one of the bloodiest and most violent books ever written. Would a highly evolved, enlightened being pit one race against another? Would he order blind obedience to his principles? Would he exalt some over others? In God's universe, there are no elite or chosen ones. Everyone is chosen and created in pure love and innocence. Everyone has equal value in the eyes of God, and that value is infinite. Biblical scholars, Jewish rabbis, and Christian clerics on your world need to go back to basics and examine the results of ancient teachings. Did they promote peace and evolution of awareness, or did they promote division and conflict? We, the founders, seldom preach, but this point is too important to let pass. Now on with the show. We return you to Egypt during its fall into worship and sacrifice. At around the same time as the Syrian invasion, shortly after 7500 BC, the Orions and Dracos began arriving on the scene in a big way, and a degree of interbreeding ensued, resulting in many of the part reptilian, part avian, part lion human forms depicted in later Egyptian drawings. The serpent race were Draco-Orion Pleiadian hybrids. The bird people were Draco-Andromedan Pleiadian hybrids. The lion tribe were Syrian Pleiadian hybrids. The Syrians, Orions, and Dracos used their superior technology and psychic powers to enslave the docile inhabitants of Egypt. As they interbred, the resulting humans had facial characteristics that resembled the head of a lizard, bird, or lion. Unlike the creatures of Pangaea, they were not interspecies hybrids. They were still human. Yet the serpent race had long necks and large eyes. The bird tribe had long, narrow faces and a nose like the beak of a bird, and the lion tribe had large, rounded heads with hair that grew like a mane. You can find drawings of the Syrian Pleiadian lion tribe and the Draco-Andromedan Pleiadian bird tribe gods on the walls of caves and remains of temples throughout Egypt, complete with exaggerated facial features. Those Pleiadians that remained pure in heart and mind, seeing the experiment once again go awry, sadly retreated back to the inner planes, and a period of relative darkness descended over Egypt. The ritual sacrifices, mummies, and mystery schools of the pharaohs were almost all the manifestation of Sirian's, Orion, Draco, and Andromedan corruption of the original Pleiadian teachings. Had the teachings of Thoth been fully integrated by his students, they never would have been corruptible. The lesson here should be obvious by now. Unless you have fully integrated your ego and higher consciousness, you can be led astray by seemingly well-meaning teachers who themselves have not integrated their egos with spirit. A final note. The goddess Isis, an 8th density Sirian, was not part of the corrupted priesthoods of later Egypt. A fragment of her energy was embodied during the time of the pharaohs, but this aspect of Isis never reached the level of awareness of the primary soul Isis in the higher realms. Earth History Summary. Let us recap and say a few words about the story so far. As many of you know, we have left a lot out and skipped some major periods and events. This is for the sake of brevity. If this channel is willing, we will include these missing pieces in a subsequent book. We have enough information to fill several books, and we feel it is vital that this material is disseminated as you approach the next processional cycle. We have not yet touched on the significance of the ancient Hebrew teachings, the Tree of Life, Kabbalah, or many other aspects of the higher teachings brought forth since the time of Atlantis by various enlightened members of Pleiadian, Andromedan, Sirian, Orion, Arcturian, and other groups. We have also had very little to say about the Galactic Confederation, the Great White Brotherhood, the Archangelic Orders, and the Universal Orders, including the Order of Melchizedek. This channel has a strong Venusian connection, another ET faction that deserves mention in future material. We will, however, include our perception of what actually took place during the time of Jesus. Some teachings on Earth suggest that the entire story of Jesus was fabricated. However, that is not true. Although there are a great many distortions of his teachings and several glaring omissions, allow us to elaborate the story of Jesus Christ. One 8th density member of the Confederation, in fact, is leading member in this sector of the galaxy, has a special story that we joyfully relate below. We are telling this story with the help of the Oversoul of Jesus, Lord Sananda. We will now illuminate your minds regarding the real story of Jesus Christ. It is important to note that the allegorical storyline of one being sacrificed to heal the sins of the masses did not originate with the events 2,000 years ago, but is a theme that has been repeated many times throughout history. long before the man you know as Jesus was carried to the cross. If you dig into the history of different cultures, you will find other such icons whose stories are very similar to that of Jesus. The idea that a Savior died for your sins and the playing out of that drama in the form similar to Jesus is an attempt by the Dark Lords to get humanity to place the blame outside of themselves in order to keep their problems from being solved. Let us get this straight. Nobody can ever die for your sins, beloved creators. That is for two reasons. One, you have free will and are responsible for everything you do. And two, there is no such thing as an unpardonable error or an error that causes you to become defective. You are as perfect as the day God created you, and you will always be perfect, innocent, and holy. Lord Sananda, in his book Set, A Course in Miracles, made that very clear. There are some factual aspects to the story as told in the New Testament of the Bible, but there are many distortions. Allow us to elaborate. The soul known as Jesus was a direct fragment of the Sananda lineage. In other words, Sananda was the oversoul of Jesus. Sananda, having watched as humankind floundered in sorrow and ignorance, and having a desire to intervene in the affairs of the world in a way that respected free will, incarnated in approximately 39 BC as the son of Joseph and Mary. This much is in general agreement with the biblical story. Jesus' birth date was approximately March 31st, not December 25th. Lord Sananda, an eighth density celestial being, incarnated as Jeshua or Joshua, depending on whose translation you use. Being from eighth density, he retained many of his spiritual abilities, despite the very dense environment he was born into. As a young child, he was very psychic and foresaw many of the events that would later come to pass. Mary and Joseph were at odds with the political establishment, and they were not married when Mary became pregnant. The virgin birth story is made up. Certain ET factions have the capabilities of impregnating women without going through normal sexual means, but in this case, Yeshua came in through normal sexual intercourse. To avoid the social and political consequences of giving birth out of wedlock and to remove themselves from the oppressive beliefs of the authorities, Mary and Joseph migrated toward Galilee and eventually near the Dead Sea, where they briefly took refuge with the Essenes. Fearing for Jeshua's life, Mary and Joseph left him in the care of the Essenes and returned to Galilee. Jeshua later joined the Essene order. He spent 3 years building temples and housing for the Essenes, while attending their sacred teachings and learning the Essene way. Along the banks of the Dead Sea, Jeshua learned to have respect for Mother Earth and had a hand in helping bring the much-needed rain, scarce in that region. The Essenes were strict vegetarians and taught a respect for all life forms. They were regarded as strange and antisocial by the governments of the land, but were left largely alone, as they seemed to pose no threat and always paid their taxes, even though they did not believe in such matters. When Jeshua turned about 16, he and a group of fellow Essenes traveled east to India, where he met several Indian gurus and saints. He studied for about 2 years with a guru who taught him a great deal about the mysteries of life. When he returned, and during a dangerous visit to see his parents who had returned to Galilee, he met and fell in love with Mary Magdalene, who was a dancer and entertainer, and only very briefly prostituted herself when times were tough. Mary M. and Yeshua were deeply in love with each other and had a male child. Because they were not married, they too became social outlaws. Some of Jeshua's Essene friends allowed Mary M. to stay at the temples with Jeshua against the rules of the elders. Yeshua, Mary M., and their young child traveled to India a second time, where the child was blessed by the gurus. Word got out that Mary M. had an illegitimate child, although nobody seemed to know the father outside of the Essenes. Fearing for the child's life, Mary M. and Yeshua left him temporarily in the care of an Indian saint and returned to Galilee. It was a few years later before they could return to India, and although they missed their child terribly, they knew he was all right. Mary M. and Yeshua paid another visit to their son a few years later, but he remained in the care of the Indian saints when they returned. The political climate was too unstable to risk bringing the child back with them to Galilee. Despite the short time they spent with their son, their influence helped him greatly as he grew up in India. He became a wise sage, and his teachings added significantly to the enlightenment of India. According to the Akashic records, the son of Yeshua and Mary M. did not have any children. Mary M. and Yeshua also had a daughter who carried on the lineage, although there are virtually no surviving historical records of the second child. Several secret societies have postulated how and where the lineage of Jeshua and Mary M. branched out from their daughter. When we examine the Akashic records, we see that there were indeed several offspring of the lineage that followed convoluted paths through the Middle East and Eastern Europe. Uncovering the lineage of Yeshua and Mary M. is not relevant to our discussion, and we will not say anything further on the matter. Regarding the absence of Jeshua's story in the official writings of Rome and other historical documents from that time period, you must understand that Jeshua, being branded an anti-social rebel, was censored from the official genealogical records of the day. During his life, Yeshua received several visions from Spirit and his soul family, and was told to teach higher spiritual principles to anyone who would listen sincerely. He began teaching earnestly in his late 20s and gathered quite a following. At one point, he had about 50 disciples. He and Mary M. kept their relationship and children a complete secret, not even discussing this with the closest disciples. Being highly clairvoyant, Yeshua saw that the authorities would eventually kill him. But he was told by his own God self to stay his course and teach as many people as possible the ways of Spirit. Yeshua's teachings were highly distorted in the Bible, but a few truths managed to get through. He taught that we are all created in the image and likeness of our Creator, and that we all have the abilities he demonstrated. He taught us to love one another and to forgive our enemies. He did not teach that the way to God was through him alone. Several of his disciples learned how to use their spiritual gifts of healing and clairvoyance. And there are ample stories in the Bible of John going on to perform similar healings and miracles. The story of Jeshua's involvement in the Melchizedek priesthood is also in the Bible, in Hebrews chapter 6 and 7. Once Yeshua reached a certain level of awareness, his cosmic family in the celestial realms began communicating with him and reminding him of his position within the Melchizedek priesthood. When Yeshua was brought to the cross, he immediately left his body consciously, instead of suffering for 3 days as is taught erroneously. During his life he continually forgave them, for they know not what they did. After leaving his body, he holographically projected himself back into human form to appear to his disciples and Mary M. on numerous occasions. The body left the tomb because grave robbers stole it. He had no need to resurrect it, as he was already able to materialize a new body once he returned to 8th density. Lord Sananda has divided his soul several times throughout history. At the present time, there are 8 divisions of Sananda on the earth. Some of these souls believe they are Jesus, and to a certain extent they are correct. All great souls are capable of dividing themselves dozens of times in order to do service work on lower density planets. Usually oversouls divide into 12 souls at a time, but this is not set in stone. Many primary divisions remain in the higher densities to guide the aspects of the lower world. The term aspect is as used here does not mean incomplete or partial. Each of these aspects is a complete and sovereign being. You will recall the cell division analogy detailed earlier. Please refer to chapter 5 for a detailed explanation of soul divisions and fragments. The second coming of Christ refers to the return to Christ consciousness, or the celestial consciousness of higher densities, or cosmic consciousness. This was correctly interpreted by your Paramahasna Yogananda and many other yogis and saints. As most of you know, traditional Christianity has very little to do with the teachings of Yeshua and a whole lot to do with sin and guilt. Fortunately, many souls are expanding their awareness beyond these primitive beliefs. We, the founders, are grateful to see so many truly doing the greater works that Yeshua taught. During this brief look at the work of Yeshua, we only touched briefly on Mary M. and the Divine Feminine, and spoke hardly a word about Mother Mary. There are numerous channeled articles by and about Mother Mary, and we do not wish to duplicate that information. Author's note: as of the time of this compilation, many books were revealing the true nature of Mary Magdalene, and many channeled messages were being given regarding her true role in the history of the earth. We hope we have set the record straight on the lifetime of the one you call Jesus. We are the founders. Chapter 4, the ET Presence on Earth. Throughout your universe, and specifically your galaxy, there are millions of humanoid and non-humanoid beings who were created from the original divine blueprint. In your local sector, there are over 100 species that have evolved from the original humanoid blueprint. Some have explored the very dense worlds, becoming caught in them. They have developed systems of thought, behavior, and philosophy that appear to oppose the principles of creation. Others have evolved out of the realms of duality and are spreading love and compassion throughout the universe. Approximately 80% of the beings inhabiting the Milky Way are kind, compassionate, and benevolent, while 20% are of the dark persuasion. On your world, the figures have been largely reversed, although that is changing as more and more beings of light come to assist Earth. Reasons for ET involvement with Earth. During our look at Earth history, it became apparent that many groups of beings from various star systems have influenced the course of human events. In this chapter, we will take a closer look at some of the players in the cosmic drama. We will answer questions such as, are there ETs participating in positive ways to implement the divine intervention? Are there ETs visiting Earth that are attempting to clear up past karma, trying to atone for past mistakes? Are there negative ETs who are still trying to take over the Earth for selfish purposes? How do evolving humans tell them apart? For now, we will provide some background information on the ETs already present within your solar system in various levels and densities. We will start by discussing the approximate number of ETs currently living on Earth in humanoid bodies. The original root race of planet Earth is 7th density Pleiadian. All of you are, in essence, ETs because you have all had lifetimes on other worlds besides Earth. However, the technical definition of an ET is one who resides on your world but has not come through the birth process of incarnation. So that would include beings who have been able to materialize from other densities and worlds. And it would also include those who have come here in spaceships and have stepped off their ships and are walking among you. Those numbers are very, very small, between 15,000 and 20,000 at the present time. Some ETs have evolved to the point where they can travel to Earth directly using teleportation, pure consciousness without spaceships. Life on other planets within the solar system. None of the 3D and 4D life forms present on Earth now or that have come to Earth in the past are capable of existing in the dense atmosphere of the outer giant planets in the solar system, so the only dimensions able to be accessed within those giant planets are the ones where gravity and atmospheric composition do not play a significant part in the unfolding of life. That would mean densities 7 and above. Many of you have heard the term Saturn tribunals. It is a phrase that denotes spiritual beings within the celestial realms of Saturn that are members of the Galactic Federation. This channel's guides are members of that organization. We have a council on, or rather in, the atmosphere of Saturn, and also one in the atmosphere of Jupiter. They are seventh density groups. On Jupiter and Saturn, life as you know it is not possible at densities below seventh. And the same is true for the other gaseous planets. There are galactic outposts on Uranus and Neptune also vibrating at seventh density. They are not full societies with large populations, but rather seventh density councils of light. So your solar system has many communities of light within its planets. The dark ETs. Let us say a few words here about the dark ones. The dark ET is one whose primary function is service to self, with a lowercase s, I note, without regard for the well-being of others. Those souls are given the term dark lords, dark ETs, dark souls, or whatever phrase you wish to use. When the term dark ETs is used, it is referring to those races that fell in vibration and were unable to realign themselves with their God source within. We assume you are all clear with the terminology we have used so far. Good. Some of the dark Dracos and dark Orions are in the astral planes and are influencing souls from those realms by attaching themselves to humans. In other words, they are soul fragments that have been caught in the lower densities of the astral, or have found their way into the astral planes through the various means, and are simply possessing, if you want to use that word, the human beings that are playing the role of hosts. They are like parasites occupying host bodies. Others are operating spaceships that are either third or fourth density. Some of them have technological cloaking mechanisms to make themselves invisible. They have come here for the purpose of attempting to take your energies, enslave you as a race, exploit your minerals, or attempt to take over your world. It should be obvious by now that they will not succeed in doing that. Klaus Schwab. During this current dispensation, which began in your 1940s and 1950s, these ET souls have had limited influence over humanity and are being carefully monitored and regulated from becoming too much of a factor in your society. You must understand that due to the need to respect free will and the law of attraction, if there are humans who are vibrating at a very low density and are full of fear, that are malevolent and malicious, they will become targets for ETs of a similar stature. During our discourse on the psychology of the earth changes in Chapter 9, we will explore in greater depths the methods necessary to free yourselves from the negative ET influence. The Orion factor. The most dominant of the races interacting with Earth are the councils of Betelgeuse and councils of Rigel from the star system Orion. The councils of Betelgeuse and Rigel refer to the representative leadership of the planets in the star systems Betelgeuse and Rigel. Betelgeuse is a star located from your southern hemisphere in the lower right corner of the constellation of Orion. From the northern hemisphere, it is located in the upper left corner The councils of Betelgeuse originated from that star. Directly opposite Betelgeuse in the upper left corner of the constellation of Orion in the southern hemisphere, or lower right corner from the northern hemisphere, is a star known as Rigel. The councils of Rigel originated from that star. The Orion humanoid forms that evolved on those systems look very similar to the human forms you occupy today. There are some specific body types on Earth that are more Orion in nature than others. The Orion male is typically heavy, stocky, and wide-shouldered, has large bones and reddish-colored skin, and is often given labels such as macho, warrior-like, aggressive, and various other terms describing a highly competitive male that tends to fight with other males to achieve domination or superiority. They want to be the supreme ruler of the flock or the leader of the group. This is common within the Orion configuration of DNA. This is not to say that all Orions are stuck in the negativity of competitive behavior, but it is a trait that most of them must overcome at some point in their evolution. When this aggressive masculine energy is used to control and manipulate other types of humans, it obviously becomes a problem on your planet. The beings from Betelgeuse eventually became known as the Lords of Light. The souls from Rigel became known as the Dark Lords, or the Dark Force, because they were much more aggressive and domineering than the souls from Betelgeuse. The offspring of the original council members became the common people of Orion. They have spread to many planets in this sector of the galaxy. Hundreds of thousands of years ago, they entered into conflict with each other and largely destroyed their home worlds through warfare. Realizing they would need to find a new home in the galaxy in order to continue their life as humanoids, they decided on your planet Earth. Lucky us. A large number of Orions came to your planet between 500,000 and 1,000,000 years ago in their native form. They were able to do this because your world most closely matched the atmosphere, gravitation, and electromagnetic characteristics of their own world and is suitable for their body types. The Rigelians and Betelgeusians found your Earth to be a more efficient and appropriate environment than many of the other worlds in this region of your galaxy, so they came and settled here. Like most humanoids from other worlds, they interbred with the species that were already here at the time, which were largely the Pleiadians, the root race of humanity, and in some cases hybrids of the Pleiadians that had survived the destruction of Pangaea. Due to various other races that visited Earth, as documented in Chapter 2, it becomes very complicated when attempting to trace your roots. Nevertheless, the dominant species on your planet from the time of the Luciferian rebellion to the present has been the Orion configuration, not the Pleiadian. Percentages of various ETs in human DNA. The Pleiadian configuration of your DNA is approximately 20% of the current human DNA matrix. The Orion configuration is roughly 75%. The remaining 5% includes a mix of Sirian, Draco, Andromedan, Arcturian, Venusian, Contemporary, Lyran, Vegan, Alpha Centauri, and many others. The Sirians make up the third largest group. They are about 4%, and all the other races combined comprise about 1% of your DNA. The Alpha Draconians or Dracos make up less than 1%. The Sirians. During the treatise on the history of the earth, we traced the Sirian influence in ancient Egypt. The Sirians are the third most abundant group incarnated on earth today. They came here at various times during your flourishing civilizations, and like the Aryans were able to walk upon the earth in their native form. Therefore they proliferated far more easily than most of the other races. The Sirians were a bit taller than the Aryans, with lighter skin and facial features. Like the Dracos and Aryans, the Sirians fell in vibration and became identified with the 3D realm, originally coming in starships and stepping directly onto earthly soil. They blended in quite well with the Pleiadian-style humanoids, having similar enough features to not arouse suspicion. However, as they fell in vibration, they became infatuated with the idea of having power and control over the ordinary people that did not have spaceships with advanced technology. They used their technological advantage to portray themselves as gods with extraordinary powers. They became addicted to this power and relished the idea of having disciples that worshipped them. They played the guru game for many thousands of years, forming cults, secret societies, priesthoods, and mystery schools alongside the more genuinely spiritually oriented schools of the Pleiadians. The present-day Illuminati, which started out as a priesthood teaching methods of genuine spiritual development, quickly became corrupted by the egos of the Sirians. The most significant visitations by the Sirians occurred after the destruction of Atlantis, and specifically during the period from about 7500 BC until the time of Christ, as detailed in chapter 3. The Sirians were the gods of Egypt during the time of the pharaohs, around 4500 BC to about 2000 BC. The ancient Greece during the period from about 4000 BC until around 1500 BC. There were several other areas of Earth where they became the dominant force during those time periods. In addition, they figured prominently in the Middle East before and during the time of Christ. The Sirians came in 4th, 5th, and 6th density forms, and in some cases 7th density. They had what you would call superpowers, or abilities that were superior to those of the Aryans and Pleiadians. Most, if not all, the gods of Greek and Egyptian mythology were from the Sirius A and Sirius B star systems. As mentioned in chapter 3, the god known as Jehovah was a 7th density Sirian who came to Earth in native form and was worshipped by the Pleiadian Orion human population. This particular Sirian god fell in vibration by accepting the idolization, adoration, and worship of the masses, and thereby became corrupted or identified with ego. Jehovah was a prime example of how beings fall in vibration the longer they reside in dense worlds such as Earth. You can read stories in the Old Testament of your Christian Bible that describe some of the genocide, torture, war, control, and manipulation that occurred as a result of the corruption of Jehovah. The Syrians interbred with the Pleiadians, Orions, and Dracos and produced the hybrid mentioned in chapter 3. The pharaohs were primarily Syrian Pleiadian hybrids. The lion tribe, the Sphinx in Egypt, is a symbolic tribute to the lion tribe. There are fragments of the lion and bird tribes in embodiment today in your world. Many of you who have memories and incarnations during ancient Egypt will identify with one or more of these tribes and feel some of their essence within your soul. In reality, most of you are a blend of several races. Unless one matrix is significantly more dominant than the others, it is not appropriate to call yourself a Pleiadian or an Orion, etc. Orion and Syrian dilution of Pleiadian DNA. You must understand that the way physical bodies propagate themselves is such that each successive generation dilutes the DNA of the previous generation. You have, for example, the following. 10 generations ago, you had a pure Syrian mating with a pure Pleiadian. After a few generations of breeding among Pleiadians, we are oversimplifying this greatly. The result will be a soul with mostly Pleiadian, but some Syrian DNA. By the time you get to generation 10, the offspring will have approximately 1/10 Syrian DNA and 9/10 Pleiadian DNA. However, it is not that simple. There is almost never going to be a case where a pure Syrian breeds with a pure Pleiadian, and then the next generations are with pure Pleiadians. It is far more complex than that. But if that were to happen, then those percentages would be approximately what you would expect in the 10th generation, 1/10 Syrian and 9/10 Pleiadian. And when we come back, my beautiful friends and family, we will pick it up right here at the Dracos, smack dab in the middle of chapter 4. We leave you in the love, unity, and light of the infinite Creator.